Girls rock you boys. Oh boy. It's Tuesday. Stuff is going on. I'll be real curious to see what's gonna go on. Corey's streaming. He's like actually been consistent this time. It's 2 weeks in a row. See what happens. We'll let people get in here for a little bit. I have been. I think literally up to like 5 minutes before the stream started, I was doing some work, so. I got this like huge delivery coming up, so I have like millions of special requests and fires all over the place that I'm trying to put out at work. Yeah, has me answering emails and messages like late at night. And then I get into work the next morning and it's just like nonstop, just constant stuff going on. Been good times. Ah, man. Let's go, champ. Yes. Mega champ in the house. All right. So, I don't have any, like, topical stuff today. Mostly because, for the last several days in a row, I have been running like a crazy person with the fear that my head's just going to fall right off. So, with that being said, we will make this super easy. And we'll go into just question and answer. Little discussion with the chat, maybe. I don't know. We'll figure some stuff out. Rico, no! Not going to Triple Crown. Going to Keystone Clash. I got invited to Keystone Clash. I'm not sure... I'm not sure if I can make that one. Because... So... I actually am doing, for me at least, quite a lot of stuff this year. But it's all, like, jammed together. So, former coworker and a good friend of mine, I have his wedding in a month. And that's in Vegas. So I'll be in Vegas for a wedding, and me and my lady. And then, like a month after that, there's a convention that my lady really wants to go to called SakuraCon. So if you're an anime fan, you might know about that. It's Seattle's big anime convention. So, you know, that costs money. Those two things cost money. And we're trying to make it a fun event. Like, we're going to get a hotel room and stay basically right in one of the nice hotels it's not like super expensive, but a nicer hotel that is kind of close to the place so that we can just very easily make our way over there. And then I have Fishtoberfest, which that's close, so that's not so bad. I also have to speak at the Greater Portland Aquarium Society at like the week after I come back from my friend's wedding, and then I have Triple Crown. So I'm already doing a lot of stuff. I don't know if it's going to even be remotely possible for me to do Keystone Clash. But I got invited, so it's kind of like on my calendar of a maybe, but probably not. I think that's the biggest problem is there's so many cool fish events now that it's hard to figure out, like, okay, which one am I going to go to? For this year, it's kind of obvious because the Triple Crown has a lot of rainbow fish stuff, so I'm there, man. All right, we'll do question and answers. I see one of my employees in chat. What are you doing here? Go ahead, go. Don't be here. You have stuff to do. Go on. Oh, jeez. Oh, man. Fish Tank Dad, Rico for president. Oh, man. I'd be terrified if Rico was president. It'd be too chill. Our country would be too chill. We might actually like each other again instead of have like two sides screaming at each other constantly. Heaven forbid, right? So Michael, my Hydrocardial Tree Partita, I know I pronounced that wrong because my brain is just fried, does not grow at all. It is losing leaves. I have pretty strong light, gravel with root tabs. 3 times a week, every other day, 1 pump of Easy Green. Please help. So if you're using like regular gravel, that could actually be your problem. Hydrocardial. Oh my god, my like brain and my mouth are not connected right now. But anyway, Japan clover. How about we go with that, right? Japan clover, because it has such a fine root system, it really needs something that's easy for it to grab onto. Typically, we do this by using things like aqua soils, even dirt in a dirt tank can work, although because it doesn't get very deep, usually it's going to sit in your cap. So it depends on how coarse or fine that gravel is. And if it is, all rock is porous, but you know what I mean? Like the difference between very, very small lava rock versus like very smooth river stone, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like the difference in porosity that you have there. Basically what you're looking for is something for it to easily anchor itself to and draw nutrients from, because that small root system actually does a majority of the work for that plant. It's very similar to Monte Carlo or dwarf baby tears, which is also sometimes called HC Cuba, right? So that's not Holanthium, but I cannot remember the H right now, but Calicotroides is the C, but just Cuba is the common name more in Europe as opposed to the United States, where we call it dwarf baby tears, where those small, super small, fine root system carpeting plants really do rely very heavily on their roots. So that's the big thing, right? And you know, I would say you're losing leaves. I want to reread again just to make sure that I'm not forgetting something here, but losing leaves. So, and the other question I would have is, how long has it been in the tank, Michael? So if we're looking at something where we added this to the tank a couple weeks ago, it could have been immersed grown, and it is still converting, which is why it's losing some of those leaves. It's getting rid of the old growth. It probably established its root system, and now it's going to steadily work toward building new growth, or it's still trying to establish that root system. It really depends. So you've got a couple of things here that could be working against you, and a little bit of factors where it's hard for me to like say for certain. But the biggest thing is most of it is going to be at its root system. That strong light is great. A little bit of flow is helpful, of course, with some of those, because it just helps push everything around. But my concern would be if you're able to tell based on your gravel if you're seeing new white roots. Look for that in the plant, and that's going to tell you you're on the right track. If you haven't seen any new root growth, what you might try doing is look for something like Flourish, Advance, right? Normally I hate the Flourish line, but Flourish Advance actually is really useful because it's very good at propagating new root growth. You could also look at something like Brightwell Florin Multi. Any of the things that are mostly micronutrients and not a lot of your macros, or no macros whatsoever, except maybe some potassium potentially. Those help establish that new root system. And that's really critical to getting those plants to catch on and do well. That's the biggest trick. Like I even struggle with those plants because a lot of times I will put them in systems where especially if I'm not using CO2, they can tend to be fighting a lot of the other things in the tank and not get enough of the nutrients they need. So it becomes a big matter of making that available at the roots, and a little bit of extra micros goes a long way with those small plants. Hopefully that will help you get on the right track. But like I said, first thing I would look at is in that gravel, if you can clearly see where the root systems are, look for new white roots. If you have new white roots, you're on the right track. It's just taking its time. And in my experience, when I've done well with those, they take a little bit of while to just like do nothing, if that makes sense. And then eventually, like all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's some new leaves. Oh, it's starting to span out a little bit. And then it just kind of goes boom. Right? You go from like months of seemingly doing nothing, and then all of a sudden it just starts branching out all over the place and gets happy. And it's really annoying when that happens because it can be very frustrating. Bob Purcell, how do I keep my pogus name on hellfry planted? My quarries appear to be digging them up. You remove the quarries from the tank. So that's tough, right? Because quarries and loaches, any of those things are going to dig around in your your substrate can make it very difficult to keep some of those finer plants in place. As something that you don't have a very long stem to dig really deep down, or you don't have a super robust root system like you would with, say, a sword or a crypt or any of those like bigger root system style plants. Hellfry doesn't usually build a really huge root system. So that's kind of... You're likely to have a consistent problem. Now, what I would do in this case is kind of a hack. So you can either A, take where your hellfry is initially planted and temporarily get some rock or wood and wall it off. Force the quarries to go up and over or up and around, right? And if you put those things in the way, and especially if you keep it pretty tight to the plants, they'll ignore that area and they'll go elsewhere where they have more open ground to get their food and to dig around and look for stuff. And then once you kind of got everything settled in and it's been there for a month or so and you know you're going to have a stronger root system, then you can remove that barrier and let it do its thing naturally. Not the best solution, I know, but it's like the ugly fix. It looks ugly, but it does the job. It's like, you know, sometimes you got to take that like reliable old beat up car as opposed to that fancy new flashy thing that breaks down every so often. Don't drive the Maserati. Just drive that good old, 2005 Honda Accord that never dies on you, but it doesn't look all that flashy, right? Oh, Leo, cool. So the spray bar works good for the aqua top, but one question, since it's a 3D print, it's shooting some water behind the spray bar. What do you think can fix that leak? Oh, right. So you've got some part in the 3D print that doesn't come out perfectly. You could use... What is that? So basically you could look at... You might almost just not care, but you could look at something like, what is it, Weldon 5 or whatever. The stuff they use to, like, cement rocks together in big aquascapes, that once it cures, it's fine. You could also quite literally pour some cyanoacrylate, some superglue gel over it, let it cure, and then put it in the water, because once it cures, it's not toxic, and it's inert. It's only while it's uncured that it is potentially a risk, but when it hits water, it cures super, super fast. So that's an option. You would then have to take it off and resettle it on back later. Or you just like, oh, it sprays a little bit on the back glass or somewhere else that's like not optimal, but it's not hurting me, and go that route. So that's kind of the decision you have to make. There's a lot of kind of like hacky fixes. Nothing is perfect, right? Other than like get the plastic kind of hot and try and fuse it together like it was solder or something like that, right? But that's not I wouldn't say that's a good fix. You're more likely to do harm than help doing that. So, some options, none of them are perfect. That's a lot of things where we're trying to like do some random DIY fix to something we got off of a random part that's not necessarily designed for that initially, but we make do, right? It's there's things. Oh no, Okwinjena lost power. That's not good. Yeah, I would definitely err on the side of caution whenever you're having power surges and power issues. Totally. Oh, and I also have a like load of email to catch up on. I just realized like how far behind I am. Oh, Clash is only 5 hours away from you. Yeah, that's not bad. I mean, if I only had to drive 5 hours, I'd make the drive. I unfortunately have to fly across country. Oh, Lord. All right, Olivier, let's see here. Tried the blackout for 7 days, still BBA alive. What would you recommend now? Yeah, I mean, at that point, you're probably going to have to start dosing liquid carbon and start killing it. Or you just need to, like, literally get a live animal in there to eat it. And that's, like, your Siamese algae eater, reticulated Siamese algae eater is my personal preference. They stay a little bit smaller. They tend to constantly graze algae even when adults, where standard SAEs get lazy and only search for protein as they get to their adult size because they're trying to bulk themselves up for breeding purposes. Depending on the rest of your stocking, I don't remember it off the total top of my head, but you could look at like a Florida flagfish. They're slightly more aggressive. But usually they can be kind of peaceful. It just depends on how much space we're talking and all that kind of noise. And even ram's horn snails, if you're not opposed to snails, ram's horns will actually slowly eat that kind of stuff. It's just much easier to do it with fish and just be patient, and they'll slowly clear your tank out. And you won't have it anymore. Or you get, like some big fat psychos like I have, and they just absolutely devour everything in their path if you don't feed them for a couple days. Yeah, 6 of one, half dozen the other, right? But yeah, that would be how to look at. Leo209, what would cause bloat in tetras and remedies? Okay. Here we go. So the most common issue of bloat in any fish is a constipation issue. So when we're feeding like processed foods, like our flakes, our granules, our pellets, all that kind of stuff, they don't necessarily have a whole ton of plant material in them. And the plant material is what helps act like fiber for us humans, right? Helps push everything through. So the way that I normally counteract this is I purposely fast my fish 1 to 2 days a week to help them digest their food. And I use a very mixed diet. So I use a mixture of spirulina-based foods and other foods. In this case, like Extremes Community Crave is like a perfect blend for me because it's half spirulina, half the krill. It gives me the best of both worlds. It makes it a little easier on a lot of my fish, so I don't see bloat very often. When this typically happens, there's lots of stuff that can cause it, but the most common thing tends to be our fish ate a little too much, they're backed up, and they need to just process extra food. This isn't the only reason the bloat happens, but the easiest way to deal with that is get some peas, whether they're frozen or canned. Frozen is easier. If they're frozen, you can microwave them or just do a quick, short blanch. So get your water to boiling and cook them for like 60 seconds. All you're looking to do is get them cooked and then be able to remove the outer skin from the pea and get to the center of the pea material. And that pea, when you mash it up, make it kind of like a paste, feeding the peas to your fish acts as a really good kind of cleanse, if you will. Also, it's very healthy for almost all the fish out there. It's a good food source and it's cheap, but more importantly, it acts as a really good way to push extra food through them. It acts like fiber in our diet, right? It's like if you go and have a lot of leafy greens or roughage, stuff like that, right? Just helps kind of get rid of stuff. That's the most common thing. Now, if you've had some kind of weird swing in your temperature, maybe you don't necessarily heat your tank, or you had a heater die, your tank is by a window that's not sealed all that well, and you had a big cold snap lately, this can mess with the fish's inherent metabolism, right? It gets really cold, their metabolism slows down, it gets really hot, it speeds up. And normal feeding that wouldn't have caused this issue in those kind of things can all of a sudden cause that problem to where their metabolism slows down, but they're eating just as much as they normally would. And again, deal with some kind of constipation because they got too much and they're not processing it fast enough. That being said, it could be a bacterial issue. It could be there's a lot of things that cause bloat in fish. Just in my experience, the most common tends to be some kind of backup in the intestines, so to speak, right? It's got to poo, plain and simple. Beyond that, like, that's where you're starting to get outside of like those kind of simple things, and a little tiny amount of salt, like something like a tablespoon per 20 gallons is a like really light medicinal dose, can help in the water too. And that way it's not too concentrated to where it can mess with some of your more sensitive fish. Although there's certain fish that even that is too much. But, most small things that have tetras, you're not dealing with those kind of fish. So I would look at doing a little bit of salt and then trying to either fast your fish for a couple days and see what happens. The biggest thing is when your fish does poo, right? We need to make sure it's a brownish color, like brown or brownish orange. What we don't want to see is white. If we see white coming out and we're dealing with bloat, more than likely we're dealing with one of two things. Either some kind of intestinal parasite, or this could be a worm or all sorts of different things, or we're dealing with some kind of bacterial issue and the fish just isn't eating at all because of that bloat, right? So that's where we start looking at potentially needing to use other medications, and that's where like the extent of my ability to figure things out falls right on its face. Because me and fish disease, I'm not very good at them. I haven't been, and thankfully it's because I haven't had a lot of fish disease, and I have really good resources whenever I deal with them locally in my club. So I'm not so good at identifying them, plain and simple. Parker, great to have you here. Thanks for the compliment. I really appreciate it. Son of a quack, any good way to clean a hang-on back intake tube? Mine is filled up with gunk, and I try to get at it using a paper towel with some aquascaping tweezers, but the brown tint and gunk is left. Yes, so go to a dollar store and find like a pipe cleaner. So you know what I'm talking about? It's the thinner pipe cleaners that they're usually like a flexible metal, and then they have all the little bristles on them. Get something like that. You can get them dirt cheap at a dollar store. You can usually get 2 or 3 of them in a pack for like $1. Or at worst, you spend $1 for one. They're usually used to clean out a number of, smaller things like champagne flutes and stupid stuff like that. Like all these weird small glasses that you can get, or just to clean pipes, right? There's something that's kind of a common kitchen material. Just go get some of those, dedicate a couple to your fish room, and then just make it easy. You're like, know that you're never going to use this anywhere else. Keep it with all your fish cleaning stuff. And then you pull it out when you're in the sink, run the pipe cleaner through it, let those bristles do their job, run some water through it, put it back in place, and you're good to go. That'd be my best solution. You can get the same thing on like Amazon or whatever, but find them at a dollar store. Save yourself some money. They're way cheaper, and they do the same thing. The same thing. It won't hurt you. Ooh, the jump. Hello, chat. I'm almost caught up, though, in the grand scheme of things. Not too far behind. Bob Purcell. Other than Praecox and Kalitawa, that's a big difference in fish, though, let me tell you. Are there any dwarf species of Melanitania rainbows? Not sure what dwarf is, but say able to do well in a 40 breeder. Oh, there's lots, dude. So you have the McCullochai. That's technically a dwarf rainbow. They only really get about 3.5 inches, very similar size to the Praecox. You can have the Rubro Vittata, which is the red laser. That's like the Praecox with extra on it, right? They look a lot like a Praecox. You sex them similar to a Praecox, but they have the extra like red pinstripes on them, and they get way more vibrant on the nose when they're similar to like a turquoise rainbow, where they get that like red streak on the nose, the headlamp, as I like to call it, when they're courting females. You have the Running River rainbow. That's another dwarf rainbow. You have the what's kind of referred to as the Malanda rainbow fish, which the most common one is like the Wallace Road. I think there's a couple catch points. You have all the Radnocentris, which all stay very small. They actually get smaller than the Tawa or the Praecox. If you can find them, the Melanitania species Ewer, which is one that I have to go find again now, which means I probably have to just like talk to Gary and beg him politely, because heat snaps suck. Anyway, there's a lot, actually. There's a surprising number of dwarf rainbows that don't get too big. About the end of that is where you start looking at some of the super small Bosemani. So this is going to be not necessarily Aves Creek, but Cromsa Creek, if you can find them, which that's really hard. I think there's only like 2 people in the United States that have Cromsa right now, maybe 3. And I'm sure like if Hoon Aquatics is in chat, he'll correct me and know better, because he's got his like finger a little bit better on the pulse than I do right now, as far as some of those more like niche, interesting rainbows. But the easy ones are going to be Rads, The Ruber Vittata is reasonably accessible. McCullochi is always super accessible, and there's a couple different color variations. You have ones with red fins, you have ones with yellow fins. They have that nice silver body with the black striping. It's very, very pretty fish. You have the Running River rainbows, my personal favorite. And then, if you can find them, the Melanda, sometimes called Melanda Golds. I think Dan's Fish actually has some of those. Now I've got to go check to be absolutely certain about this. Dan's Fish. He's got tawas still. Oh man, he got a lot of tawas. Jeez. It's killing me. I don't have room for more fish, but I want them. He had them at one point, I swear. I just don't, they might not be in stock anymore. I need to see. Because he had them through, I'm pretty confident, through Marcel. Which is a fantastic person to get fish from in the first place. I probably would have been better off, like, searching by names, but... Oh, and another one that doesn't get too big is the Kamaka. It gets a little bit bigger than the Praecox, but not by much. But they do stay fairly small. Well, am I really not seeing this? Hold on. Hold on to the night. That's right. I made weird references. Huh. So... Dan does have the Wapoga Red Laser. That's the other nickname for the Ruber Vittata. That's a really great fish. And if you look at pictures, you'll see the little pinstripes I'm talking about between the scales, and it is more apparent on the tail. He also has McCullochi Stark River. I could have swore at one point he had some of the Melandas, but I guess I am, like, totally off on that. They're hard fish to find, to be fair, so... Yeah. But yeah, there's some options. There's some options. Me personally, I go with Rads, because Rads have a more obvious body shape. They've got that cool kind of smaller torpedo. Oh no, he does have. He just has it as Melanitania species Wallace Road, which they're called the, like, Melanda Gold was another nickname they had for a while. Really cool fish, gets a nice red body, has kind of an interesting head shape, which I find very interesting to them. And then they get a kind of a goldy blush in them and very dark fins. Very cool little fish. And not super common. Not a lot of people have that fish. Very cool little rainbow. Alright, dive through. Lots of people saying hi. Chat is going big. Just crazy tonight. I like it. Considering that Corey's streaming, I appreciate it. Just want you guys to know. I really do appreciate you diehards being here. Because I understand the appeal of going to say his coopness. Plus, he had a cool topic today. He was talking about... filtration, and if dirty filters, like, just don't filter as well, or some other stuff, and I quite like that. You know, it's I like when we explore topics like that. Connor Costello, what is your opinion on aquarium plants like Hygrophila, Crypts, and Anubis, Java Moss out of water? How much humidity and care? Also, can I use a terrestrial plant light? So, okay. You're talking about immersed growing in general. Almost all plants, with very, very, very rare exception, that we use in our fish tanks actually grow immersed and naturally in the wild, or at least their wild varieties do. They don't grow fully submerged all the time. Very rarely are they fully submerged. Sometimes they're seasonally submerged, but for the most time they grow immersed, where it's just the roots underwater or in kind of a wetland situation where they're in not necessarily water, but in a very wet substrate environment, right? Think like kind of marshes and stuff like that, right? This is where a lot of our aquarium plants grow, or like, you know, water ditches and things like that, or they grow on the side of water where they get some water during the flood season, but not as much during the hot seasons. Some of them grow as epiphytes, where they're attached to wooden rock, and maybe that wooden rock is touching the water, and that's how they're getting their resources. But other than that, their leafage and their foliage is exposed to the open air. And occasionally they're in, like, flood areas where, examples like Booses and Crypts, Piptospathas, a couple other in that, like, epiphyte range, or some of the rooters that are in areas where, like, one day the water's at this level, the next day it's at this, the next day it's like this. Borneo is a lot like that, where the depth of some of those creeks and streams changes by feet in a day, because of like monsoon season and just how their weather is. It can be really crazy. So these plants spend a lot of time out of the water, then very shortly in water, then out of the water, and they just go back and forth and back and forth. So most of our plants actually do very, very well. Now, certain plants don't do so well. Everything you listed does. But some plants just end up being a little bit better underwater the entire time. However, basically all the ones that are grown in a farm, none of them are grown submerged the entire time. They're all grown immersed. And some of them are grown with only like a hydroponic style setup where they're not really in a super humid environment. They have a little bit of humidity, but mostly it's water at that root system. Now, if you want to go that route, my suggestion is check out Pacific Northwest Aqua Hobby. So PNW Aqua Hobby. I'll actually get a link to his channel. It's my buddy Will. He shows all sorts of stuff about how he grows his plants. And does all sorts of cool stuff with immersed growing, explaining how to do it, how his system works, why it works, the type of fertilizers he uses, the type of lights he uses. In those cases, the second part of your question, yeah, when you're doing that kind of stuff, you can totally use terrestrial plant lights. You can use cheap floodlights, really. You don't have to have super expensive lighting. For a majority of the time, the reason why I review aquarium lights specifically as opposed to like other DIY solutions is because for most fish keepers, they'll go and they'll look for specifically, okay, what's a fish tank light? And I want to advocate for the end user. That's part of what I do in my job, right? So I work in software and hardware test. My whole job is basically to break stuff for a living, or at least for the people under me to break stuff for a living. I spend a lot more time like juggling issues and assigning stuff down to the people underneath me to get some of the data on these things. Nowadays, when I first started, it was definitely not the case. I was hands-on the whole time. But our end goal is to advocate for the customer. We're there to make sure that the quality bar is continuously raised to ensure that we get the best experience for our end consumer. So I take that same mentality when I'm looking at things like aquarium lights. I want to look at the stuff that is marketed directly toward aquarium keepers like me, like you, and put them to the test because you're paying a premium for those things, right? Even the budget lights, your Beamswork, your JCMP, your Higer, your Nicrew, etc., 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 they're a lot more than a cheap $20 floodlight, right? But those $20 floodlights, if you go watch like MD Fish Tanks, he's had like super cheap, like 15 pounds, so about $20, right? Floodlights on big, well-planted tanks, and they do well with CO2, right? So he's got environments where he's pushing the demand of the plants higher and using a cheap light. You can totally do that. But the reason why I specifically do your aquarium lights is because they're marketed toward people, so they better be worth the premium that you have to pay over some of like the DIY options out there, the cheaper options, your terrestrial lights that sometimes are cheaper, sometimes they're way more expensive. It depends on what you're looking at. That's part of why I do those kind of things, right? So yeah, can you use a terrestrial light? Of course. You'll want to get one that has a more white spectrum. You don't want to get one of those ones that's just like looks purple or is only red and blue light. Don't use those kind of things. The grow lights that are for those basement tomato growers, aka all the people who like to grow cannabinoids. Don't do those lights. You want ones that have a white spectrum similar to our aquarium lights, but you can totally use them. They should have their information about what part of their spectrum they cover. They should be full spectrum, all those kind of things. You'll be fine doing that stuff. Sometimes you pay more for those, sometimes you don't. It's all about where you're getting it and its general quality, but a lot of those can't handle the humidity, so you usually have to have a really well sealed off tank to prevent that humidity from getting to that terrestrial light, where the aquarium based lights usually have some level of ability to handle some amount of moisture. Not all. Some of them are built so cheaply they just can't handle any, But usually they can handle a little bit of splashing, a little bit of more humid environment, like if you had an open top tank. Because they need to be able to do that. That's what they're designed for, right? Some of them do it really, really well. I can't tell you the number of times I've gotten water all over my fluval lights and they just don't care. Dropped it in a tank, splashed stuff on it, dropped my sponge for my intake on it, splattered gunk and stuff all over it. It just doesn't care, right? They're well built, but you pay for that premium, right? It's there. Oh, whoop. I saw a question, and then chat jumped, which means I'm behind because I talk too much. Oh, man. Have too much fun with myself. John Morgan, I've been trying to catch a live stream to thank you for the 180-gallon fire eel / Chilathrina blairi disco party suggestion you made quite a while ago. It's in full swing and looks great. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you committed to that, because I love blairis. They're just a riot, and fire eels are super fun too. I have danger noodle. Spoiler alert: there might be more than one danger noodle in the near future. Yeah, but yeah. I had a buddy who had a huge, like 360-gallon cube aquarium built into the wall of his house, and for a while he had multiple fire eels in that thing, and those guys got big because they had lots of room. They were still super cool because when they get bigger and they get used to you in a tank like that, they're not as scared. They come out a lot more, and you could practically feed them by hand. It was pretty wild. Pretty wild. Olivier, I wanted to try Siamese, but they are hard to find right now. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I need to put my name on a waiting list, but I think I'll do it. Yeah, if you can get them, find the reticulated version. So they're going to be like silver body with kind of a crosshatch between the scales, and then they'll have just a triangular mark at the tail. That's their official name. Hold on. It ends with reticulatus, but I can't remember the genus. This is how you know I've looked this up enough times. Oh man, I need to copy paste that because I will spell that wrong if I try to do it by hand. So the Crossochehilus reticulatus. I probably pronounced that slightly wrong, but that's the one you're looking for. That's the reticulated Siamese algae eater. If you can find those, get those. That's my personal suggestion. They tend to be a little less aggressive too, but if you get them in a big enough group, they can be. Once you start getting like 3 and they get full size, they get a little wild, bullying each other around, but usually they're kind to the other fish in the tank. Kingfisher's catch. Oh man, got a Joe Davis question. It's time. We're gonna get the good one, right? What would you use to feed a grindle worm and micro worm culture? My cultures arrived and they're in worm bedding currently, awaiting their next meal. You know, the person that I knew that was doing them really, really well basically just used, like, white bread. And, not milk, but, like, I think it was literally just, like, they took the base culture that they had, and it was just, they added a little bit of bread and water every time they changed that culture out, and that lasted, like, a week or 2 weeks or something like that. I have never really done them for a long period of time, so I'm probably the worst person to ask on that, but that's all I remember. I remember them being, like, simple, but then it was, like, too much for me because I'm such a slacker. That's too much work for me, man. Oh boy. E-Littles, is there any kind of aquarium assistance that is off limits to ask for when submitting Indepth Solutions? I mean, there's never something that I'm going to say don't even ask me, but I will be honest with you if I don't think I can help. Like, I've had a number of people email me with, like, disease-related issues, and I'm just not that great at those things. So I say that very upfront, and then I walk them through a process of what I would do in order to figure it out, but I make it really clear, like, I cannot definitively tell you it is X or Y. I can help you on the process I would use to try to figure some things out, but it doesn't guarantee that we're going to find the answer. usually, and majority of the questions I get in Indepth Solutions are almost all algae related. I get a lot of algae stuff, which is why you haven't seen a Indepth Solutions video in a while, is most of them have basically been like the same kind of question, but a different tank, and they're all small different solutions, but to me it's only worth making a video if it's such a different topic or such a wild case of things that it would make for something interesting. Because you don't want to see like 10 videos that are all about how to fight blackbeard algae. I know that in the case of Olivier, he probably was like, yes, I do. This stuff won't go away. I've been fighting this stupid stuff forever. But, it's... For me, I would know for certain that people would be like, yeah, man, we've seen the video about blackbeard algae. What else you got? I caught enough stuff in comments recently for a number of things. So I imagine if I did what some people would perceive as the same video over and over again, I would just get my, my ears bashed in or something. Okay, another question from Joe that is interesting enough. One of my gobies is all fat and chunky. The smaller one of the two isn't gaining nearly the same weight. At what point do you medicate? So before I would ever medicate, I would try to isolate the other goby in something like a breeding box, where I can guarantee that goby has no competition for food, and I would do some work to try and make them feel safe in there. And I would put a small amount of food in there and watch them eat. If they are reliably eating what I deem similar amounts to the other fish, that's where I would start being paranoid about medicating for something like a parasite. If that fish is not eating at all, now we know why they're not gaining weight. Some other issue is going on preventing that fish from wanting to eat. Or if you could see the fish's poop and see, like, is it brown, is it white, is it fuchsia, whatever, is it not coming out at all, there's just none despite them eating, whatever that might be, right? We can start kind of figuring out where our problem is and then decide whether it's a medication related issue or something else. That's the first route I would go. I am very hesitant to medicate, and part of it is just because I feel like a majority of our issues are things that are not necessarily disease, but are situations that are occurring in our aquarium, whether it's like negligence because of lazy people like me, or just, some little thing is getting slightly out of whack because maybe we missed a couple water changes, we've been busy, or it was like, I just need to top this off, I need to get this other stuff done, or I just cleaned the filter, or I've got lots of plants, or whatever our like internal excuses that allows us to not necessarily do the optimal thing, but what is okay and should be fine for our fish that could potentially lead to like, well, this little thing got a little out of whack, and then it got a little more out of whack, then I got a little more out of whack, and all of a sudden now it's out of whack enough that one fish who might not be as robust as the rest of the tank is kind of the canary in the coal mine for us, right? We always make that joke, the canary in the coal mine, when it comes to our fish. We're like, certain fish, or certain plants in that case too, like really are the ones that show things first. And a lot of times it's our less healthy isn't the word I want to use, but I'm just going to say healthy because I don't want to think too hard. Fish, right? So the smaller goby in this case is like not as healthy. That's not accurate necessarily, but we'll use that for now. It sounds terrible, I know. And we can use that to identify something going on. Let's look at everything slow and carefully and figure out, is it a disease or is it something else happening? And that's where we can just kind of apply some patience and some look and do some isolation is like where I would do it and try to like, well, does this fish eat at all? Does this fish eat as much as I think this fish should? Or is this fish just like got some other issue going on where they're like, they don't eat a lot because they're just always going to stay small? Maybe there's some genetic issue that's occurred. Who knows? Sometimes you get rainbows that just never get much bigger. They just stop at one point and they're like half the size of the other adults in the tank. And they eat fine. You see them eat every day, but they just don't get very much bigger because they eat kind of light. and there's plenty of food for them. They're just like, nope, I'm done. I've seen that with my rainbows. Possible it could happen with a goby. I'm not a goby aficionado, so I'm probably talking like right out the rear end, but that's the approach I would take. The Fishy Mailman. What's up, buddy? Are you excited for the club meeting with a speaker talking about Rads? So first off, the next week, next Tuesday, the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society will have Marcel W., Roseline 17 on Aquabid. He's a pretty legendary breeder if you're a rainbow fish fan or a pleco fan. He does a lot of those things, but he does some other stuff too. He's going to be talking about Rads, so Radnocentris, to my club, and it will be an online presentation, so it will be on YouTube. And yes, I most certainly will just act as the pre-show for that. And yes, I am super excited because, one, Marcel is a fantastic guy. He's just a wonderful, wonderful human being. I have not personally met him, but I've interacted with him a bit. He's a wonderful human being. And everybody I know who has interacted with him just loves him to death. Right? He's a fantastic breeder. He's extremely good at what he does. I'm really excited. And he's a big Rad fan. Like, he's one of, like, the biggest Radnocentris collectors in the United States. He has quite a number of different strains, so he's got a lot of experience with these fish. And they're cool. I think they're a really underappreciated rainbow that needs a lot more love because they grow a little faster, they color up earlier, they start bigger, but they don't get that big. So, like, the babies actually typically of most Rads can eat brine shrimp right away, where a lot of the rest of the Melanitanias just can't do that. Yeah, they're just cool fish, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to say about them. Kyle's Aquariumetrics. Just got a new Nano Melanitania from Dan, the Kalitawa. Super excited. Lucky. That's a great fish, and they're very rare right now. There are not a lot of people in the United States who have that fish. And it's kind of like the hottest of hot new rainbows. And with good reason. It's a beautiful fish. Beautiful fish. Uh-oh. Bob's about to... I've been enabling Bob on that fish for like a week and a half. He keeps asking questions in the members-only Discord for you members who are out there. If you're not in the Discord, you should totally come hang out every once in a while. It's kind of like the bat phone directly to Bentley. Mark St. Ange, hope I pronounced that right, got an outbreak of ick in my quarantine tank. All fish are okay now. How can I make sure the quarantine tank is now free of ick before putting new fish in there? Sure. So the easiest way to make sure it's free of ick, completely drain it, clean it with a bleach and water solution, rinse it, then refill it and start over. I know. That's a nuclear option. The shorter option is run an extra dose or two of your ick cure, so whether that's ICX or whatever it may be, and really carefully vacuum the bottom. So if you have gravel or something, you need to just do a very thorough gravel vacuum to make sure that any of the remaining larvae or eggs are taken care of. And then from there, you should be okay. You could also crank the tank up temperature-wise during that period of time to make sure that whatever's down there hatches and gets hit by the medicine and dies before it has a chance to replicate any further. That would be kind of an extra level of care. You could also take an approach of dosing a reasonable amount of hydrogen peroxide into your water system. This is another kind of like nuclear option, but that is a way that you could do stuff. Just definitely don't have anything alive in that tank. Like, not plants, not nothing. And that will very efficiently clean things out. That's what I'm saying, you know. Just there's options. Just some are a little less nuclear. Connor Costello, what is your opinion and care on Madagascar rainbows? Well, I mean, the purist in me is a Madagascar rainbow isn't a rainbow, but no, we accept them in the rainbow community because they're beautiful, wonderful fish, and you were really not sure how they got out there. Yeah, I like Madagascar rainbows. I think they're a cool common, uncommon fish, if that makes sense. Like, you can find them a little bit more often, but not a lot of people, like, keep them in the grand scheme of things. Like, a lot of your big rainbow buffs, you don't necessarily see Madagascar rainbow tanks from them. The, you know, dum-dums like me who are like, you get stuff like that. But they're a great fish, and the care is basically the same as almost any other rainbow. I would say they get kind of long. They don't get as tall as a lot of the other rainbows. They're a little bit more like Parkinsoni, where they get actually surprisingly long and torpedo-like. They'll get like 4.5 inches long in some cases. Now, granted, they're pretty old when they do that, but they will. So just give them some swim room. You know, a 4-foot tank is going to be optimal, but realistically, a small group in a 40 breeder is just fine. I really wouldn't push it much below that. I mean, in theory, you could use a 20 long with like a group of 5. But I personally wouldn't do that. I would go at least up to like the 3-foot tank range. Give yourself a 40 breeder. You really want that new Aquarium 60 breeder that came out. That's a 4-foot version of the 40 breeder footprint. Just AKA a short 75 gallon. Pretty awesome. Could do some amazing work in that thing. Give them lots of swim space. And if you give them some plants, they really color up nicely and they look amazing. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, they're very similar to every other rainbow out there. Really, really similar. They don't really have anything too complex when it comes to their care. Lorcan Tomwing. I just set up a Dutch scape, planning to do my 50% water changes every 3 days. How long should I wait till I use liquid ferts? Well, I guess it depends on what level of substrate you used. I mean, realistically, I would be using liquid ferts within the first week. But that's how I roll. I would do a really lean dose, mind you. So in the case of like, let's say you're doing a 50-gallon tank, right? I would, if I was using my all-in-one fertilizer where it's 1 pump per 10 gallons, I would put in a pump per day. Just this continual low lean dose would be what I would do. Now, can you go longer? Like if you're using a full ADA substrate system and all that crazy stuff where it's really nutrient rich, or maybe you're using a dirted tank, then I wait a little bit longer. You could probably go 2 or 3 weeks. The only thing you might want to look at dosing is something that's just your micros. So again, Brightwell's Florin Multi is a good example. Flourish Trace, although a little watered down, is an option. And any other kind of like all your micros doesn't hurt you. That just helps establish a good root system and some of the other stuff, and let the macros be controlled by the substrate for a little bit until you get everything to be nice and balanced out. In the end, what I would say is, do you still have ammonia and nitrite in your water? Then I would not be dosing any liquid ferts at that point. Once you've gotten to the point of where you no longer register ammonia and nitrite for a few days, then look at your nitrates. If you're still registering a lot of nitrate in your water, probably still can hold off, or just dose a very minimal amount to get some micros in the water. Once you get to the point of where you start seeing 5 or less parts per million nitrate, now is probably a good time to start dosing some of your water column and making sure that you have a continuous available nutrient source for those plants, so that they don't kind of have a growth spurt and then go to like a remission, right? We want to keep them happy. Makes it easy. Michael, do you say that Easy Green does not really have all this micronutrients that plants really need in a higher volume, and it has to be supplemented with something different? No. What I'm saying is, use something that doesn't have the macros in it. So like Easy Green has everything in a pretty reasonable dose. Unless you have a really complex tank, you're probably fine with that. But what I was explaining is more, if you avoid adding the macros so that you're only relying on the extra micronutrients, those are the things that typically help boost some of that root growth. Or if you really want to be hyper specific, the best thing for root growth is calcium and magnesium. So if you wanted to go hyper specific, you would actually dose additional calcium and additional magnesium, and potentially a little bit of manganese, but realistically, it's just those two. Those two are responsible most primarily for your root growth. Now, those are macros, technically, but usually you have enough of that present, and it's the micros where we start running out of some stuff. It really depends on, like, what that substrate is, as to whether or not I would look at that. So, like, when we, let me give you an example. Safety Zorb, right, is used by a lot of people as a substrate. And when we charge Safety Zorb, the best way to charge Safety Zorb is to first and foremost add in magnesium and calcium. Because what you really want is for the most plentiful thing that boosts and enhances your root growth and health to be there at the root system. So one of the best videos I like to point to about how to charge it, he uses purely that. Now, me personally, what I would do is like 2/3 of my substrate, I would charge with those two, and then 1/3 I'd just dump a ton of like Easy Green or Thrive or whatever, pick your liquid fert, and let it soak up a bunch of that stuff. That way you have a mixture of stuff, kind of like miniature root tabs all over the place in this system that is designed to help the roots grow and buffer your water a little bit with some hardness, right? Because that's the other thing that will do. Gorgachev, do you think that underground filters could have benefits for root feeding plants? Sure, you're going to naturally draw down a bunch of the mulm, and it's going to get down there and get processed until it becomes inert. The question is how you're using the undergravel filter. So if you're using undergravel filters as a way to use your gravel to do some of your pre-filtering before it hits like a canister filter, because I've seen some people do that to keep some of the particulate matter out, then not so much, because you might actually have too much power pulling through. But if you're doing it air driven, it might be a little bit better, because if you have too much power pulling through, you could have some weird stuff where it messes with the roots and how they attach to things, or potentially your substrate system. Unlikely if you're doing your system correctly, right? But there's a very minuscule chance that it has some issues. But realistically, I think that the biggest problem you can run into is those root systems could bind up a lot of things and make it harder for the undergravel filter system to be as effective. Now, the likelihood of this happening is extremely low. You'd have to have some really, really aggressive root system style plants, so like Amazon swords, that like to build these massive, ludicrously dense root systems and just take up the whole plate, right? That's not likely to occur. Technically possible, but not likely to occur. So in the end, do I think it would help? Most likely. Are there some extremely edge case scenarios where it could be a problem? Yeah, but the likelihood of that happening, again, extreme edge case, very unlikely to occur. Leo 209, it's my second one to get it in 2 months. The other one didn't make. Tried the salt bath, didn't work. You think you won't survive either, or try fasting, see if it works. So I would try fasting first, because like my biggest question is this fish just handling too much food in its system, and that's causing other stresses, and then that weakens its immunoresponse, and it dies from something else, right? Let's try to chop the complexity out and see what happens. Also, Leo, welcome to AutoSync. Thanks, man. Thanks for becoming a member. I appreciate it. Don't forget, if you are a member, you get a free member super chat, which was done nice and early. Voting Rico for president by one of our members. I don't know why the pinned message is like... It's actually like blocking some of one of my views on stream, which is a little obnoxious, but you know, that's life. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. I want to take a couple more questions and hopefully not take too much time. Dr. Black is in chat, so I have to assume the man is streaming tonight. Let's go hunt down the link so that you guys can be... For those who want to have a beverage with my good friend, you can do so. There we go, that's in chat. Dr. Black will be up next in roughly 15 minutes. Unless I talk too much. Usually he's nice and waits. Oh, man. Okay. Alex Kumanoff. Are Melanitania parva, Lake Kuranoi, the ones that say fired up? Also, info on the Melanitania amari would be appreciated. You know, I don't know for certain if the Lake Kuranoi are the ones that say fired up. I'll try to look them up. But that's the problem, is like having infinite knowledge of rainbows is really hard because there's 8 million of them. Let's see. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed with parvas is the older they get, the longer they stay fired up. But yeah. So, like, I can see some that are kind of washed out, so I would guess they don't stay, like, always fired up at all times. I had one that was just, like, he never dropped his color, but he was an old boy that I adopted, and I wish I knew if he was some specific catch location, because that guy was just, like, on fire all hours of the day. Like, I could go in at night, and I could still see that his color was just tip-top. That fish was incredible. Incredible. But I'm not certain. As for amari, you know, I have to see it. This is the problem. With a lot of the rainbows, I have to see them to remember. Because I commit a lot of them to name, but not all of them. Let me look them up on rainbowfish.angfa. Oh, yeah, these guys. They're really yellow fish. Okay, so the simple thing here is they're one of the yellow rainbows, right? They have a nice yellow color. Not very common, which is the big thing. And really the biggest thing is that it's one of those fish that is kind of a woo in like the really tight rainbow fish community where a lot of people really appreciate amari, but not a lot of people keep it. It's not one of those ones where you go and like every rainbow like psycho out there is like, I must have amari. Then that's the thing, is like there's so many rainbows that it becomes this like, you find people that fixate on certain fish and they keep those fish. And then you'll find other people who are like, you know, your Lucas Bretts or me in some cases where you're just like, oh, I want a couple of that and a couple of this and a few of that and a few of that and a few of this. And you got like a bunch of them all over the place. But this fish is not super common. So when you get a chance to get it, it takes a while. They're one of those fish that takes its sweet time to look really, really good. But when they do, they're one of the cooler yellow fish out there because they have a more stripy pattern to them. Right? You have like the Herbert axelrodi, the yellow rainbow fish, where the whole body is yellow. Where this instead has nice yellowy orange finnage and like yellow pinstripes all over the body, except for a pretty strong black band in the center. So kind of similar to Trifasciata with that big black band, right? But then these like yellow kind of racing pinstripes. And that's the cool part, because you get to see some of their stuff. And it does depend a little bit on the catch location, I think, because there's like two... Maybe it's only one. Hold on. I thought there was a second location, but like looking at the rainbowfish.angfa is there's only one listed. But the nice part is you get that like kind of racing stripe look, and that's a unique look, right? Seeing those fish that their color is more in like small pinstripes. An example would be like the Goiter River rainbow, right, where you got the finnage and then like stripes in the body is where most of your color is. That's a more unique look in rainbows, and those kind of draw your eye of your aficionados, because they're like, that's a little bit different than just like the yellow rainbow fish, right? And that's where they get cool. They're one of those things that you see a few good pictures of them, but they're so much better appreciated in person. A lot of rainbows are like that, actually. Like some of the coolest subtle rainbows, they're kind of like my blue Hawaiian Moscows. They're so hard to capture on film, but when you see them in person, you're just like, I see why this fish is amazing. Like the Melanitania bowmani, so B-O-W-M-A-N, name for Ron Bowman. It was impossible for me to ever get a really good picture of that fish. But if you saw them in person, you just go, I know why this fish is awesome. That fish looks stellar in person. That's the killer part of the rainbows. Some of them are just like impossible to photo and film well, and then you see them in person and you're like, why doesn't everyone have this? Why don't I see this all the time? And it's like, yeah, it's because it doesn't show up on camera for a... Kills me. Kills me. Trouble with Rads is they're a blackwater fish. Dude, no. You don't have to have them in blackwater. You can have them in regular water. Just keep them in slightly softer water. It helps you. But it doesn't have to be like, 30 TDS. You can keep them at 150 TDS and you're okay. You just don't want to keep them in like liquid rock. And even then, most Rads will adapt to it. Like Marcel's out in Wisconsin, who breeds a lot of these things. There's harder water out there. It's not ultra soft. They do just fine. They're rainbow fish are really adaptable to water conditions. They just like really good, like water quality. Does that make sense? So like they can adapt to a lot of pHs and a lot of hardnesses. But the big thing is, like, well-oxygenated water matters a lot for them. In general, just nice, clean water matters for them. So that's why they do so well in planet tanks, because the plants help keep that water in really good quality. Mark, thank you, Bentley, and the best pronunciation of my name I've heard in a long time. If you have a way to phonetically spell it out so that I know how to pronounce it, I'm super curious, like, how close and or far off I was, because I know some names I butcher miserably. And I feel terrible because I know I do. And there's others like I kind of get lucky. Oh, man. JP3, can you list some dwarf rainbow fish? I haven't been able to find one. Should have been here earlier, sir. Really quickly. I'll recap. Melanitania calatawa, Melanitania mccullochi, Melanitania praecox, Melanitania rubra-vitata, also known as the Wapoga red laser, Melanitania running river, the running river rainbow. Then there is the Wallace Road, or sometimes called the Melanda or Melanda Gold. Any Radnocentris species are all dwarfs. And then the last one, this is incredibly hard to find it, would be Melanitania species Iwer. There you go. There's a list of dwarf rainbows for you. List of them. I know I missed some other question because chat jumped like crazy on me, but I'm trying my best. QD. My salinity refuses to cooperate. You're asking the worst guy. What's a good method for ATO that's not so large? I mean, there are some small auto top-offs out there, like actual auto top-off tanks, and you do them with, like, basically RO or close to RO water so that they'll... Because keep in mind, when your water evaporates, that the salt and stuff doesn't go anywhere. So auto top-off, typically you're trying to get almost nothing in it because you're trying to maintain that same salinity level by not adding any extra minerals, but basically re-diluting down the minerals you already have in the water system. With the exception of when you get some of that mineral stuff dried to the side of your glass or acrylic, whatever your tank's made of, then yeah, sometimes that doesn't necessarily reabsorb into the water. But the goal of most ATOs, auto top-off units, is to just continually dilute the water back to your original point. Now, I deal with pure freshwater fish. I'm not dealing with such hard minerals that I need to worry about that. And I live in an area with very soft water out of the tap, so I have to buffer my water up. So very frequently, I never have to deal with those kind of things. I've never had an ATO. The ATO is called my python, and I go into my fishery with a python and I top my tanks off. So I'm probably the worst person to ask for legitimate information on that. You know who is actually pretty good about auto top-off information and is a buddy of mine? That would be Darren over at Rogue Aquariums. Easy to find and relatively responsive when it comes to his Instagram. He does have a small YouTube channel. I'll give him a little pitch. He's got a small channel, and he doesn't post all that often right now. I know he plans to at some point, but he's a saltwater guy. So, I mean, this is a guy who, like, his frag tank is 175 gallons. Like, he's a big saltwater guy. This is a link to his channel. But he has this huge, like 600-gallon acrylic tank with an auto top off. So this guy's got experience, right? I mean, this is a reef dude, really knows his stuff. He could probably give you slightly better information when it comes to dealing with an auto top off system. What's going to help you a little bit more there. What's your favorite rainbow for a community tank? All of them? They're pretty much all great community fish. I would say that then in that case I start getting a little more what's the word I'm looking for? I go back to my roots, and I'm going to say Bozemanai. Because Bozemanai, by far, they're the fish that got me into rainbow fish. They're still my favorite rainbow, even though it's getting really close with the running rivers. Because, like, when I watch my running rivers colored up and see them, like, super tightly schooling together, I just feel great. I feel great because I love that fish. And that fish has some special meaning and story to me. But in the end, Bozemanai is what got me into rainbows, and I will never not have Bozemanai somewhere in my tanks because I love that fish. It is probably the most iconic rainbow, and for good reason. It's a beautiful fish, incredible color, and there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. M&C Aquatics, would you recommend a dirted tank over aqua soil? No. I'm one of those people who's had like horror stories happen to me with dirted tanks, so I'm inherently biased against them. Now, if your fear is the cost, I can understand why you'd want to look at dirt. And a lot of people, there would be a million people in the comments later or in other videos when I talk about dirted tanks, like, I've done dirt for blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I get it. I get it. I get it. To me, it is way easier to use aqua soil to do the things I need to do. Does it cost a lot more? Of course. But it's way easier for me with the plants that I use and the way that I do things in my aquariums to use aqua soil. So I will basically, by my own experience and bias, never suggest a dirted tank. That doesn't mean that's the right answer. The right answer is, what do you have better experience with, and what are you more confident in? If you are more confident dealing with a dirted tank, and you've dealt with them before, then go that route. If you know that, like, aqua soil is easy, I just do X, Y, Z. I just pour it into the tank, I put my plants in, I do some water changes, I test, I let my plants do their thing, and then, bam, my tank is just ready, and I put my fish in. Then you go with aqua soil. That's it. Easy peasy. Like, it's what I recommend is based on my own biases. So if you have experience with dirt and you haven't really used aqua soil and you're comfortable with it, go with dirt. But if you've never done a dirted tank, go with aqua soil. It's like the brain dead way. You don't have to think as hard. You don't have to worry about some of the risks. You don't have to, like, very carefully measure out a cap. And you don't necessarily have to carefully do this, but you don't have to go as dead on things, right? So that's where I would draw my lines. Bob Purcell, what's your pick for the Super Bowl? Well, as a Seattle Seahawks fan and native, I inherently hate the Rams. I hate everything their organization represents. I hate the mentality of trading off every first-round pick known to man for the next 35 years or whatever the heck they've done to win now. I hate that stuff. And other teams do it too. So, I don't like the Buccaneers at all either. I don't like what Kansas City's doing. I hate that, like, just sell the farm to win now mentality and, like, figure out the salary cap and all that stuff later. I know, football and a fish stream, but we're almost done. So, inherently, I have to hope that Joe Burrow can do the thing, and that the Bengals, who have never won a Super Bowl, can finally win one. What fish would represent the Bengals and the Rams? Well, of course, I would say Bengals, tiger barbs. See where I'm going? Now, the other thing that I would use to represent the Bengals, actually, is I would look at something like the Clausioensis, potentially, or realistically more the like Calimoisi in the rainbow range, if we're going to go specifically rainbows. Got that nice bright orange color, right? Very, very pretty fish. A little bit of black on them. Perfect. Bengals all the way. Rams. Blue and yellow. Little tougher to get in a fish when it comes to freshwater. However, we can do this. We can mix up some things, a little bit of turquoise, a little bit of Herbert axelrodi, the yellow and the blue rainbows. Bam, we've got that mix. We got a tank. We got our Bengals versus our Rams. Or we could do this like completely brain dead and go German blue Rams. Rams to go versus tiger barbs. And then my money's on the tiger barbs. But I want a lot of tiger barbs. I want like 400 of them. Remember Corey's tank? Remember when he had that huge thing of tiger barbs? You run his hand all over the place and then follow him all over the place? It's got to be tiger barbs. Got to be Bengals. That's my choice. Got to do it. Got to do it. Okay. We are close to the end. Man, I'm getting... I like these. Maybe I need to do more just like pure Q&A. We're getting a lot of them. So, that being said, just a reminder. Yeah. Yeah, he does a 2-hour stream, so that's where it is. Bozeman, the Chicago Bears tank. Hey, man. Don't you put my poor Bozeman in that franchise. Bozeman have terrible defense. the Bears do have good defense. I'm joking. I hope Chicago gets better later. I've got a good friend who's from Chicago. But, yeah. What I will say is we are close to the end here. I'm going to quickly answer one last question. Oh no, science topics, you're killing me. It's a little too big. But if you did miss it, shoot me an email, bentley.pasco@gmail.com. I will get to you. I'm usually like a week behind. I'm about a week behind right now. I need to catch up. But I'm planning to this weekend, or throughout this week if I get a little like moment of clarity. But Jacob Hill, I'll answer your question as the last one. I just looked over my tank and noticed a dead cherry shrimp. My ammonia's at 0, nitrate at 0, nitrates 0 to 20. I just got the shrimp home Sunday. Do you know why my others are good, though? So, I mean, here's the thing. Let me ask you this. How did you acclimate them? What kind of temperature are they sitting at? What's your general hardness in the tank? Do you have a source of calcium? Did you see them eating? How long has the tank been established? There's a million questions with shrimp. This is part of why I'm a failure at shrimp. If you haven't noticed, I don't have shrimp kind of anywhere. Because I've failed with shrimp more times than I would like to admit. And that's because I've made lots of mistakes. And everything that I'm saying right now, every question I've asked you is because I've made the mistake and done the wrong thing, and that's why I lost my shrimp. So what I'm really trying to say is, for shrimp questions, I would talk to somebody like Lucas Bretz, Flip Aquatics, my buddy Nick over at Shrimpy Business, or if you get a chance to, also Eric Lucas at bipetshrimp.com. These are all people who shrimp is their specialty. They know a lot more about shrimp than me. But in general, I would ask those couple of questions to myself. If we have a relatively new tank, there's a potential that there's not enough food for them and we need to feed those shrimp more. If we got those shrimp in and maybe they were kept at 72 degrees or 70 or 68 degrees and our tanks are like 80, 81, maybe it's a little too hot. And then finally, like if we're in really soft water tank, we put a bunch of Caridina in there, there's potential that they didn't like that change and they came from much harder water. So those are the kind of things that I would look at, figure out those things when it comes to my tank, and then make some small adjustments and try to help make it easier on those shrimp. Shrimp in general don't like to get too hot, they like to be a little bit cooler. 74 is kind of great, but they can go super cold too. They can get all the way down to like the 50s or lower. I've seen them in like iced over stuff in ponds in the winter. Sometimes we want to keep them a little bit cooler, more like 70 to 74 range is better, or maybe even like 72. When I was doing best with shrimp, I kept them at about 70 degrees. So we might be running a little too hot compared to what they were kept in initially because they are new. If we didn't acclimate them with like a slow drip, that's a potential because they are a little finicky when they're first acclimating. So that's just kind of the lines I would start looking at, Jacob, to try and figure out what the problem is. Leo29 Aquatics, how do I join the Discord? So just as a heads up, the Discord is for Pseudo McGill and higher, and then you automatically will get a thing in YouTube when you join as a member. It'll give you a link to go directly to the Discord. So there's that. But you will have members-only stuff in your perk section. Like, if you just go to your join, you see that you'll have that button that says See Perks. If you click on that, it shows you all the stuff, and if you qualify for the Discord, it will have the link there. So, that's it, guys. Dr. Box coming up next. I really appreciate everybody being here, especially the diehards who came through Corey's stream. I appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome. Bye-bye.